So starting from today, we are going to talk about some real macroeconomics. The first topic is GDP, which is probably one of the most important concepts in macroeconomics. In this session, we are going to talk about how to measure GDP. So GDP, or gross domestic product, is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. So this figure shows a breakdown of the world's GDP in 2023. So in that year, the world produced the total value of $105 trillion of goods or services, right? And the US is the largest economy in the world and accounts for almost 1/4 of the whole world's economy. And China is the second largest economy in the world, and Japan is the third largest one. So this figure shows a time series of the GDP in US, China, and Japan from 1960s to 2020. So we can see that US kept a very stable growth rate over a very long period of time, which is very impressive. And China started growing since the last 4 decades, and is quickly catching up. But for Japan's economy took off very early, but after 1990s, that kept quite stable. So people call that the lost decades in Japan because they lost growth for 20 or 30 years. So what's the GDP? The formal definition is the market value of all goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. And we want to talk more details about the definition. And the first point is the market value, right? Because we want to measure all the goods and services in the economy, right? But an apple and a car is not comparable in terms of both production complexity or even the values that produced for people, right? So to make different goods comparable, we will use their market value as their weights, right? So basically, we are measuring each goods and services based on their market value or price, right? To sum and add all goods up to get our final number, right? So basically, we're using the price of the good times the quantity of that good produced. So we got the total value of one good and do that for every good to sum up to get the whole GDP. Right? The second key point is the final goods and the services. So when calculating or measuring GDP, the general rule is that we only counting goods sold to the end consumer, right? So suppose we have the steel manufacturing industry and the car manufacturing industry. So steel industry will produce steel, and the car industry will use steel to produce car, right? So to calculate the total value, we are only calculating the values for cars. We omitted the steel. Why is that? Because steel is already used in the production of cars, so that steel doesn't generate any extra values for people, right? It's only the cars generating values. So we are only measuring the values from the end consumer or end product. The third point is that we are calculating within the country, which means we care about the location of the production. So an American-owned factory operating in Mexico, that will add to Mexico's GDP even it's owned by American people, right? Because we're only calculating about the location. Also, the Toyota plant operating in the US will add to the US GDP, even it's not owned by American people, but still it goes to US GDP. And also the BEA also does the calculation like GDP equivalent stuff for states and metro areas. Okay, the next point is we are calculating the value in a given period of time. So that's usually quarter, which is 3 months, or year, or which annually, which is every year. Also, to see the growing growth or to see the growth of the economy, we also will calculate and analyze the growth rates year by year, right? Rather than the raw dollar amount. Other than GDP, there are other measures of this economic growth. So GDP, we care about the geography or location of the production. Another concept is GNP, gross national product. So that GNP will care about the ownership. So GNP calculates the total value of goods produced by citizens of the country or by firms owned by that country's citizens, right? So GDP cares about location, GNP cares about ownership. Also, we have the net national product, which is GNP minus depreciation, because when times goes by, our capitals, either like buildings, machines, they will depreciate, right? The machines, they will wear down, buildings, they will fall, right? So that will be some cost so we need to adjust for that kind of cost into our values produced, right? So to adjustment for that kind of cost, we use the total value produced minus that depreciated value to get the net national product. So this figure shows the idea of GNP and GDP. So GNP values of all goods and services made by the country's residences and businesses, regardless of the production location. So we care about ownership. GDP, we measure production inside of the country, regardless of the ownership. So, after the definition of GDP, the question is how to measure GDP within the country, right? So normally we have three methods, and these three methods should give us the same number. The three methods are income method, value-added method, and the expenditure method. So they should give us the same number. Why is that? Because your spending will always be another people's income, right? So if we add them up, the total spending should be equals to the total income. So if we calculate all the expenditures, this value should be equals to all the incomes. Right? Also, when you spend money, you must be buying some goods or services, right? So the value of that good or services must be equal to your spending. So also total spending should be equals to total output. In that sense, this equation should hold total income equals to total output equals to total spending, and all of these three are our GDP. So we can go from either way to calculate our whole GDP. Right. The first method is the income method. We go from total income. We just add up all the income earned in the economy. So this income can be forms of wages and salaries goes to the workers or labor, right? And interest and the profits goes to the financial capital owners or the firm owners. And rent goes to physical capital owners or land owners. So that's all the income we have in the economy. Also, we can also go from the production side to calculate all the value added in each industry to calculate all the total output values. So how to do that? We want to determine the total output by adding the gain in value from each step of the production. So we start with the value of all materials produced, and for other goods and services, we add the value of produced items and subtract the cost of intermediate good inputs, right? So again, go back to that example. For car production, they are using steel as inputs, right? And that steel is already used in the process of production, right? So the value of that car production actually is the value for all the cars minus the value of the steel used. That's the idea of value-added methods. And we are doing that for every industry. To add them up, we get the total value. Also, the expenditure method for which will calculate all the total spending. So we just sum up all final spending in the economy, right? So here the point is final spending, because go back to our steel and car example, we are only calculating the car spending, not the steel spending, right? Because steel is not the final good, only car is the final good. Up When we use this expenditure method, we need to do some further adjustment because based on exports or imports, sorry. So we need to add in the money received for exports. Why is that? Because the idea of GDP is that we want to measure the production happened within our country, right? But for exports, we are selling the goods were produced to other countries. So that value should goes to our GDP, but it's not our spending. So we need to add them back, right? That's why we need to add for export values. Similarly, we spend some money to buy goods produced in other countries, which is our imports. That import value is not produced by our country, so that should not goes to our GDP. So we need to subtract that part of the spending from our GDP calculation. Right. So that's the expenditure method. This figure summarizes how to calculate this GDP using three methods: income method, expenditure method, and value-added method. Okay, now we want to use a very simple example to show how to do this GDP calculation and show how it works for three methods and why they will give us the same number. Suppose we are in a very simple economy with only three industries: mining, steel manufacturing, and car manufacturing. And each industry will use labor and materials as inputs. So for mining, there is no raw material. They only use workers or labor to produce ore, right? And ore goes to the steel manufacturing industry. So in that industry, they use ore and workers together to produce steel, right? And that steel goes to next step, which is the car manufacturing industry. So in that industry, steel plus worker, they will produce cars, right? And the consumers, they only buy one good, which is car produced in the economy. So here is this figure shows how this economy works, right? So we have the mining industry. Suppose they produced $100 of ore, right? So that $100 is the revenue in this mining industry, right? So that revenue can be broken down into workers' income, which is $80, and firm owners' profit, which is $20, right? So it goes to next step, the steel manufacturing, they produced $300 of steel. And that $300 of revenues, again, goes to three parts. Now we have some material inputs. They used the $100 of ore produced in the previous step, and workers' income and owner's profit. So these three parts of money, when we add them together, should give us the total revenue of the steel industry. Right? And goes to car manufacturing industry. We use the material cost, which is the steel. $300, and workers and ownership's profit, add them together should give us the total revenue of the car industry. Right. So how's the income method works? We just add up all the income in the economy, right? So in the economy, what kind of income do we have? We have workers, we have firm owners, right? So workers, they will earn the labor wage, and from the firm owners, they will earn this profit, right? So we just add all the workers' income from mining, steel, and car industry, and add all the owners' income, which is the profit from mining, steel, and car industry, right? So for workers' income, we have 80 coming from mining industry and 150 coming from steel industry and 40 coming from car industry, right? So the second part is owner's income, which is 20 profit from the mining industry, 50 profit from steel industry, 300 profit from the car manufacturing industry. So when we add all the numbers up, we got $1,000. So that's our GDP or total income. So the second method is the value-added method. How does that work? Remember, we are calculating all the value added in each industry and add them up. Right? So the value added in each industry is the value produced minus the material cost. Right? So for mining industry, there is no raw material. So all the $100 is their value added. Right? For steel manufacturing, they produced $300 of steel, but it's not all generated by this industry because they cost $100 of ore. So they only generated 300 minus $100 of values in this steel manufacturing. Similarly, in the car manufacturing industry, although they produced $1,000 of cars, but this $1,000 is not all generated within this car industry because they used $300 of steel. So we need to subtract the intermediate goods inputs, right? So we add all the value added in each industry, we got the same number, $100. The next method is the expenditure method. So which we will calculate the expenditures in final goods. So in this economy, only have one final good, which is cars. So the value is simply $1,000. So these three methods should give us the same numbers.